Welcome, Very Traveler, to this video. Assassin's Creed used to be in my top 10 favorite video game series. Presently, I cannot be bothered to muster any sort of emotional response when presented with a new entry to the franchise, but back in early 2010s, that was a different story. What's there to say? I'm a big fan of interesting plot hooks and solid world building, and once upon a time, Assassin's Creed had both. Oh, how the mighty have fallen. I'm also one of the few people who actually like the modern storyline, believe it or not. Desmond was a good PoE character and I was genuinely invested in his journey. So you can imagine how well that went for me when Assassin's Creed 3 came out. But we will get to that in a minute. The past me sure was having fun getting sucked into the world building and being charmed by the characters, not knowing just how thoroughly all of that is going to get wrecked. And because I still get mad anytime I think about all that wasted potential, I've decided to do the thing people often do nowadays and complain about my issues on the internet. It's not going to solve anything, but it may make me feel better and it will hopefully be entertaining to watch. So let me tell you what I liked about the series and when it all, at least in my opinion, went wrong. Minor spoiler warning for Assassin's Creed 2 and Assassin's Creed Brotherhood. Major spoiler warning for Assassin's Creed Revelations and Assassin's Creed 3. As I said, we shall start on a positive note, because it's all gonna go downhill from there, so let me tell you what drew me to Assassin's Creed. It was, first and foremost, the very specific setting. The Third Crusade? That's not a time period you see used very often. And are those innovative stealth mechanics? Color me intrigued. I also love Prince of Persia, so anything with a similar gameplay is bound to catch my attention. But it wasn't just the potent combination of interesting historical setting and being allowed to climb tall buildings. The story too made sure I stuck around till the end. Altair's journey slots neatly into the character loyal to a cause or a person has to rethink their loyalty after discovering that said person has used them for their own gain or the cause is not what they thought it is trope, which is one of my favorite tropes to read. So even if the gameplay of Assassin's Creed got repetitive, my curiosity at what Altair will do next kept me going. Though it wasn't just the historical portion of the game that piqued my curiosity. The future part, or technically the present part, used to frame the past events, at the time fresh and novel idea, held its own intrigue. You see, I pay attention to world building when reading or playing a game, and I assume, perhaps naively, that if you mention a thing that is significant within its own universe or implies other things, you are going to do something with it. Am I often disappointed because of this? Yes. So not only was I rooting for Desmond, the actual protagonist of the overarching narrative, to escape his captors at Abstergo, I was also hoping the game and the series as a whole, because by the time I got to play Assassin's Creed, the sequel was already out, will elaborate on the conflict between the Templars and the Assassins in the modern times. Listen, I love me some good secret societies with funky magical items that try to simultaneously destroy each other and keep said funky magical items out of public eye. It's always fun to watch. It's difficult to quantify how much of this hope was fulfilled by Assassin's Creed 2, but the game nailed the look and feel of Italy during the early Renaissance, so I wasn't complaining. With the added bonus of an excellent story, it's no surprise that at the time this was my favorite game, and to this day it's one of my top games of all time. It wasn't simply the setting, though that did a lot of the heavy lifting. Since Assassin's Creed 2 is a continuation of the first game, however loose the connection between them may be, it naturally brings with it the intriguing question of what the Assassin Brotherhood has been up to. After all, it's been a few centuries since Altair, and we are also in a different country. And there's not really any brotherhood to speak of. The story of Assassin's Creed 2, while simple in its premise, a young man wants to avenge his unjustly killed family and uncovers bigger conspiracy, is well executed, and Ezio is a fully fledged character of his own, not a simple vessel for the player to insert themselves into. Which is why the revenge plot works as well as it does. Not only do we spend enough time with Ezio's family to get attached, and feel sad and or angry when they are betrayed and executed, there is also an implied depth of connection in the interaction between the family members you simply can't achieve if you don't have a protagonist with a concrete set of characteristics. At the same time, Ezio has room to grow and change, which he does as the game progresses, and that makes following the story along feel worth your while. Especially since the characters in the present time tell you that this Ezio guy, oh, he was a legendary leader of the Brotherhood. And then you dive into the past to find a Renaissance fuckboy. Who wouldn't be curious to see how he becomes a capable leader of a secret society of killers? But Assassin's Creed 2 isn't as acclaimed as it is simply for its story and historical setting. The gameplay aspect too, while not as impressive today, was done well. It was built on the foundations of the first game, but improved in essentially all aspects. Be it seamlessly hiding in crowds of people, or freely running across rooftops, hiding from enemy sight, or simply enjoying the scenery. Also double hidden blades, let's go! In other words, the gameplay loop was fun and the feeling of repetitiveness which plagued the first game was nowhere to be seen. Great story, fun parkour, stealth and meeting Leonardo da Vinci. What more could you possibly want? Maybe some more fantastical elements, What the first game only hinted at, the second decided to expand on, and so the mystery behind the Apple of Eden unfurls into a separate plot thread in what has to be one of the most famous video game cutscenes of all time. I am of course talking about Ezio's meeting with Minerva under the Vatican. Actually, let's talk about the precursors as a whole, since I mentioned Minerva just now. The precursors, or Isu as they call themselves, were a race of beings that lived on Earth and one day decided that they really need some slave labor, and thus humans came into existence. What happened to their society is unclear as of Assassin's Creed 2, but they left behind great temples that stood unchanged and hidden for centuries, and more crucially for both the assassins and the Templars, mind-enslaving artifacts also known as Pieces of Eden. Some of you may have already clocked the Isu as an ancient aliens, which can be a boring trope, but it was, as of Assassin's Creed 2, well implemented and I couldn't help but be intrigued. What was their goal? Are they really all gone? And how does Desmond fit into it all? While my questions were unlikely to be answered anytime soon, it was obvious that the Isu aren't here simply to justify the existence of the Pieces of Eden, but are going to play much bigger role since they are connected to the present storyline with Desmond. Or at least they should have. And with that, we move on to the negatives as we attempt to figure out where it all went wrong. The obvious answer is when Ubisoft fired Patrice Désilets, the original creator of the series, officially due to creative differences. The second, slightly less obvious but still very obvious answer would be when Assassin's Creed 2 made a bank and Ubisoft decided to make it their new cash cow, which relates to the first obvious answer, because eating the author is usually the first step in the process of turning a game series with a good story into a cash-grabby, soulless mess of a franchise. Also, making a new game each year had to, sooner or later, result in creative bankruptcy because that is simply not enough time to make something interesting and polished, or functioning at all. So that's the obvious stuff out of the way, which means it's time to poke at the narrative to see where it's the wobbliest. Because while the games in the series are, for the most part, connected loosely, there is a connection. The present time storyline. The historical parts of the games may share some thematical similarities, but may also be completely different in all aspects. The present time storyline is obviously supposed to be directly continued with each new game, at least in theory. This was just a very roundabout way of me saying that I think the story started falling apart in Revelations and fully collapsed in Assassin's Creed 3, and it has never recovered. Coherency whomst? Why that happened is obvious, but how does it manifest in the narrative specifically? First off, Revelations. By the time it came out, Patrice Désilets already left Ubisoft. Ubisoft promised it won't affect the game being released, but I personally think that was a bold-faced lie, but whatever. I'm here to complain about the story, not to engage in real-life politics and the repercussions they have on art. My main issue is simply that Revelations does not deliver on the mystery it promises, which has less to do with the game itself and more with its place in the trilogy. What I mean by that is that since it's the third and final game featuring Ezio, it has to satisfyingly conclude his story, tie any loose narrative threads together, and give the player enough new tidbits about the issue to make them curious to see more, and thus buy the next game, without giving the entire mystery away. Minerva's message at the end of Assassin's Creed 2 is a big moment for Ezio, yes, but also for the player. It is a promise of things to come, of mysteries to uncover, of dangers to fight against. But the following games, not so much Brotherhood because the focus there is clearly on the human side of things, and also it's the middle game so it can afford to do that, fail to make use of that setup, and because of that, the resolution of Ezio's story that Revelations presents to us feels unsatisfying. Or maybe unsatisfying is not the best word to use. While I personally feel the ending we got for him was disappointing, it is a perfectly coherent conclusion to his arc in the game. He chases after mysteries that puts him in danger, but he continues. He learns that his predecessor did the same and it ruined his life, so he decides not to make the same mistake and leaves to settle down. So no, the issue isn't with Ezio leaving the apple behind at the end of Revelations, rather with the context in which that happens. Real talk, I struggled to verbalize why exactly Revelations felt so disappointing to me when writing the script. I vividly remember thinking, wait, that's it? When I finished the game years ago, until my friend made me realize that this is a case of a mystery box. This term refers to a form of storytelling where there's one central mystery that underlines all other enigmatic happenings and secrets. In other words, all narrative threads are connected and exist because of this one central mystery, the proverbial mystery box. In the case of Assassin's Creed, the mystery box contains Isu and their knowledge and, that is the most crucial point, their plans. Every enigmatic event the characters experience and every magic device they find is eventually revealed to either belong to the Isu originally or to be based on their tech. Narratives that use this structure can only ever end in two ways. Either we open the box or we don't. There is a secret third option when you're really bad at writing, where you stuff the box with so many things it spills out and the mystery fizzles out. Or you forget the box is even there, but that's not the point here. For the reader/viewer/player, the more satisfying option is when we open the box. After so much teasing, isn't it fair to reveal the whole truth? Not opening the box requires a lot more work, because such an ending has to justify itself to the reader who is eager to know what is in the box. Maybe the cost would be too great, and the characters aren't willing to pay it, but this has to be established before we get to the opening of the box, otherwise the reader will feel like they wasted their time with the story. It's a different case when the box is empty. We still opened it, and even if there was nothing, the mystery is solved. But getting to the box and then just leaving, well, that's a much harder sell. And it's the selling part where I think Revelations fails. Based on the ending of the game, we can assume that it was indeed building up to not opening the box and leaving, so that the character of Ezio can be retired from the series. After all, there are characters telling Ezio to stop, and that's precisely the issue. For the majority of the game, it's outside forces pushing that decision on Ezio, and very little seems to be happening internally. Or if it is, it isn't communicated clearly, which is basically the same as if nothing was happening. Now, for some characters, making a final decision based purely on external pressure could work, but not, in my opinion, for Ezio. He is the kind of guy who doesn't bend, as evident by his entire life story, and he also has a reckless streak, so the final decision not to open the mystery box has to be his own. You may argue that he is older in this game and thus wiser, and can learn from others who made a similar decision and how it ruined their life. That, I think, is what the game was trying to do with Altair. The final execution, however, leaves a lot to be desired, and it feels as if Altair's only purpose in the story is to be a moral lesson for Ezio, which dilutes Altair's character. I'd even go as far as to argue that the hand of the author is showing way too much in this plot thread. It's obvious where Ezio is supposed to end, it's just that the process of getting him there is, how shall I put it delicately, half-assed at best. I understand the picture being painted here, but it has been left as a rough sketch, a mere skeleton of a story nearly collapsing under its own weight. The result of this inadequacy is that Ezio doesn't earn the option of not opening the box. The bare-bones narrative simply can't support this decision in a satisfying way. Instead, it comes across as if he changed his mind because he met a woman who is not like other women, Sofia Sartor. Sofia is not a bad character by any means, but she's so underutilized that her only role in the story amounts to being a damsel in distress, and the prize for Ezio to motivate him to make the right choice in the library at the end of the game. I'm sorry, but Ezio changed his mind because he met a hot lady doesn't have the narrative weight you seem to think it has, because it happened several times already, and in this specific case it serves as a shortcut to justify Ezio's decision not to open the box. You see, he could open the box, but he found this lady who is the one for him, and he will finally go and settle down with her and be happy and leave the Assassin Brotherhood behind. Which, since when was that something Ezio wanted to do? Not to mention Sofia? Granted, we saw very little of Sofia, but she didn't strike me as the type of woman who craved domesticity. I'm not saying that this narrative decision could never work, but there simply wasn't enough work done to make it feel natural, similar to the whole plot thread with Altair and Ezio learning from his mistakes. Again, I see what they were aiming for, but the delivery leaves a lot to be desired, which honestly is a sentence that, in my opinion, summarizes Revelations as a whole. To quote a Metacritic review, Revelations is not a bad game, but neither is it a good game. To which I'd add that its mediocrity is an issue primarily because it is a closing title in a trilogy. And now for Assassin's Creed 3, the actual topic of this video. Here my issues are twofold. First, Desmond's journey goes nowhere, and two, Connor's story feels like a clumsy attempt to copy what people liked about Assassin's Creed 2, what with the revenge and all. I will talk about Connor and his story in more detail a bit later, but in summary, Connor's motivation for everything being just revenge, combined with how the story is paced, not well, results in him being a rather boring one-dimensional character who is just angry and little else, because there isn't enough space for him to develop, or even for the player to get to know him properly. I found myself enjoying the DLC The Tyranny of King Washington more than the base game, in large part because it felt Connor is no longer being hounded by the narrative to perform the same trick over and over at a breakneck speed. Also, George Washington as the evil king of America works almost too well, but I'm getting off track. With Assassin's Creed 3, the franchise officially shifts focus from Desmond's journey being accompanied by the historical parts to the historical parts being the main story, which makes his character suffer, and his setup done previously sort of fizzles out, and the pacing of the game certainly doesn't help. The plot threads involving the Isu and their artifacts, which you'd expect to get some kind of resolution, considering the previous games set Desmond up to be important for their plans, mostly fall apart. And not only because the game decides to kill Desmond at the end. For all we looking up close at a great Isu temple, we might as well be in an empty parking lot, because the game does absolutely nothing with the place. Probably because the entirety of Assassin's Creed 3 was cobbled together from free scraps of author's notes held together by duct tape, and if it wasn't, it certainly feels like it. Consider Juno, for example. She as the big bad feels so random, mainly because she comes out of nowhere and her presence is more annoying than actually menacing. Thematically, she does kinda work, but you would have to do a lot more heavy lifting to make me believe there is this malevolent entity that has been influencing both the Templars and the Assassins for centuries. I can suspend my disbelief, but only so much, especially when you're doing a lot of telling, but not much showing. Yes, we have a precedent of other issue popping up, Jupiter in Revelations, but the context of his appearance made it make sense, and most crucially, the game was not trying to convince us he's a secret evil mastermind that is super smart and did all these evil things behind everyone's back, and was there from the start, trust me bro! And speaking of Jupiter, wow, they did absolutely nothing with him. And Minerva too feels like an afterthought. Also, when did all of this become solely about saving the world from natural catastrophe? Don't get me wrong, I don't hate the plot point of the solar flare. It just feels like we shaved what could have been a significantly more interesting storyline down to a bare minimum. I can't help but feel like there was supposed to be a lot more build up to the whole solar flare thing. Let me remind you that the main point of the conflict between the Templars and the Assassins is free will. So like, where did that go, Ubisoft? Where? Are we no longer interested in having thematically cohesive narrative for our video games? See, I like to pay attention to the story a game is telling, whether it's through dialogue or hidden secrets scattered around the world, and I did the same while playing Assassin's Creed and Assassin's Creed 2, where I couldn't help but notice that both assassins whose lives Desmond learns about were great mentors, who led the Brotherhood to great heights. And when Assassin's Creed 3 also started with the Brotherhood in shambles, I took it as a confirmation that there is indeed a pattern to the stories being told across the three games, and thought, yeah okay, all of this is surely building up to something, I see what you're doing there. Except no, turns out there was no point at all. It's not even about me being angry that Desmond got killed. Yeah, that was a shame, but I'd be more okay with it if there was a point to it at all. Like if they killed him to close off the modern storyline and the following games would only focus on the historical bits. But no, that's not what they did. They kept the modern storyline, except there now was no interesting character to carry it forward, so it was completely pointless. Almost as pointless as all the Izumegi tech, because that also went absolutely nowhere, and any cohesion that was there during the first game and the Ezio trilogy went poof after Assassin's Creed 3. Probably because they yeeted the main writing guy, aka the guy who knew what was in the mystery box, and that is always a bad idea, but I'm not here to make excuses, I'm here to complain. And complain I shall, because what is this? But enough of me bitching, how would I write it? First of all, let's ditch the looking for a precursor item we need in the present time excuse. Because that held maybe in the first game, if we assume the Templars have limited amount of historical references to the item they're looking for, so they choose the one time period they are sure it was in, and then never since. Especially once the series started jumping back and forth across history. But if that's not the reason for the story to look into the past, what is? How do we justify including the historical portion of the narrative? Which we have to have, since at this point that's a crucial part of the identity of the Assassin's Creed franchise. It's actually very simple. We present the past as a parallel to the future. In other words, we make Connor's journey mirror Desmond's. Both characters have their own unique inner conflicts, but they also share some, namely the struggle with identity when you're caught between worlds and being pulled into multiple directions. In Connor's case, it also makes much more sense to focus on his sense of belonging as his main drive forward, because distilling his journey to be just about revenge does him a great disservice of contrasting him with Ezio. And that is a comparison Ezio will always come on top of, because his story is simply better written and better presented. However, we can still have a thematic link to the previous game through the Assassin Brotherhood, since Ezio's trilogy cemented it as a group of people sharing the same ideology. That free will is the most important aspect of humanity and has to be protected, rather than a religious group. And that means it can always be rebuilt, regardless of time period, geographic location, or cultural background. But enough of general statements. This is how I would write Connor's story. For starters, I wouldn't kill off his mother. The narrative I intend to present would work even with her dying, but I think it's that more interesting if she remains alive. And Connor's main motivation for leaving his home is not revenge, but the desire to know where he comes from, the other side of his heritage. Curiosity can be a powerful force, and it will gnaw at you until you get up and find the answers, even if it means leaving all you ever knew behind. Connor's core conflict is therefore his identity as a child of mixed blood, and to resolve it, he has to go find who his father is. Or was. For all he knows at the beginning of the story, the man could be dead. His mother's stories are vague and unsatisfying. And this in turn is the main driving force behind his actions up to a breaking point, meeting his father face to face and learning that he's an asshole and a murderer. The information Connor finds up to that crucial moment is conflicting. Some of it paints his father as a cruel monster, while other brings up his good deeds. In a twist of fate, both kinds of hearsay, the positive and the negative, turn out to be equally true, because Haytham, Connor's father, is a man full of contradictions. And that should very much be the point. Making all the Templars purely evil does the characters and the story a disservice. We are best off having many flavors of big bads, from the irredeemable scumbags like Rodrigo Borgia or Vidic, to people whose ideas may not be completely wrong, but they nonetheless choose very questionable methods. Back to Connor though. After he has the unpleasant realization that his father, while a complex person on his own, is not a good man, and Connor, regardless of his own conflicting feelings towards the man in question, doesn't agree with his actions, Connor now has to ascertain what this means for him. He shares his father's blood, but does he share his nature too? Was his own existence a mistake? This is where Connor's mother, still being alive, offers an easy escape from this inner conflict. He could gain peace by rejecting his father's blood and only acknowledging his mother's, and returning to live with her, never quite belonging but nonetheless living with someone he loves. But this sort of peace would always be incomplete. You can never truly be free until you accept all parts of yourself, the good, the bad and the ugly, and so Connor too has to accept and reconcile both parts of him, and in doing so, he gains the inner stability and understanding he has been missing all his life. Once his inner conflict is resolved, Connor can finally take on the mantle of an assassin proper, not as something that would help him find his father, but as something he believes in, a cause he is willing to fight for. And since the Brotherhood is once again in shambles, he goes to rebuild it in a way that reflects who he is. As a place for the lost, for those caught between worlds who have nowhere to go, but still want to live, not just survive. This is also a little thematic link back to Ezio and his tendency to recruit people living on the street to be assassin novices. The creed gets revived and reinvented, as it's bound to do, and we jump back to the present storyline, where Desmond's facing his own fears and struggles. Not too dissimilar to Connor's, a looming shadow of a father, as well as Holast's identity crisis and whatever the Isu are up to. Actually, where do the Isu and their artifacts figure in the past portion of the game? Nowhere, because they are not relevant to Connor's story as they are to Desmond's. I would keep the existence of the Great Temple implied but not confirmed until we get to the present times. Let's say the group of native people Connor hails from has legends featuring a mysterious temple that we see Connor's mother share with him when he's young. The player will quickly realize, based on the description, that she's talking about an Isu temple, but for the characters in-game, it is simply a legend. It may or may not be true, but since it adds nothing to Connor's character arc, there's no point involving it further. It would only make the story feel weirdly splintered. And since we're talking about the Isu and the Great Temple, let's make Juno actually scary, shall we? Because while her inclusion in the original Assassin's Creed 3 feels kind of random, she has the potential to be a truly magnificent villain. Now, to achieve that, Revelations would have had to do some heavy lifting, but let's pretend it did for a moment. Imagine, when viewing the memory discs, the recorded memories of Altair would sometimes glitch out to Minerva and Jupiter talking, but just as they are about to say something important, the memory fixes itself to show Altair's life once again. This happens enough times for the player to realize that someone used Altair's memories to rewrite the discs, to hide information. Information that could be crucial for the characters in the present. And then, by the very end of the game, you get a name, Juno. Maybe the message from Jupiter about the Great Temple ends with him saying her name, or there are other smaller shards of information hidden outside the recorded messages. The stage for the next game is thus set. There are at least two Isu actively trying to affect the future. Minerva, whom we know, and this Juno, who appears to be working against Minerva. With enough build-up like this, Juno can take center stage as the main villain. That means Connor's story is the side dish and Desmond's is the main course, but also that we don't have to justify Juno's existence by forcibly shoving her into Connor's journey as the original Assassin's Creed 3 did. With all of that being said, how does Desmond's story go? Revelations ends with him waking up from his Animus-induced coma, knowing about the end of the world and the temple that could fix that, and in this version of the story, he also knows Juno's name. To make good use of that setup, let's not immediately rush to the temple, but spend some time trying to figure out who this mysterious Juno is. Altair saw a map of places connected to the Isu at the end of Assassin's Creed 1, remember that? Might be a good idea to tie that back to the main plot. And it would also further show that Juno is dangerous, and what's worse, she's active, unlike Minerva. Just imagine visiting a few places connected to the Isu and finding evidence of Juno's existence and her tampering there. It would make finally meeting her in the Grand Temple much more impactful, don't you think? Visiting few other locations before the Grand Temple also gives us an opportunity to see more of the modern-day Brotherhood and how it functions under the leadership of Desmond's father. The way I envision the story, we would visit 2 to 3 places where we find something about Juno, because thanks to Desmond's everything, the characters would be able to go further and deeper into the temples than anyone before could go. And then we would get the message about Desmond's father being held by the Templars, and we would have to go save him. After which the story would finally go to the Grand Temple and stay there till the end. This way, we not only give more space to Sean and Rebecca and allow them to use their individual skills to help find more about Juno, we also give Desmond some time to figure out how he's feeling about A, no longer being quite 100% human anymore, courtesy of Isu meddling, and B, about his father as both his father and the mentor of the Brotherhood. William Miles is he's a complex character, and we should not shy away from showing that. He's burdened with the seemingly impossible task of making sure the Brotherhood survives, but this also heavily skewers his judgment. The end always justifies the means, and everything is for the Brotherhood. Fear and pain are inevitable consequences of the fight against the Templars, as is hurting your own family. After all, only the strong will survive, and so you need a firm hand to eradicate every weakness. Seems that he forgot that the core belief of the very Brotherhood he's trying to save is free will. Desmond's journey would therefore be about him taking control over his life. Agency, or lack thereof, is a big theme of his character, as is the question of identity. Ideally, this journey would have started in Revelations, with all the being trapped in the Animus because his sense of self shattered to 1,000,000 pieces. That was a prime opportunity. But alas, we can't have nice things in this franchise. For the purpose of this video, let's pretend Revelations did some work so Assassin's Creed 3 Desmond doesn't start entirely from scratch. Desmond is the kind of character who is good at going with the flow, but even someone like him cannot keep quiet underneath the mounting pressure forever. He will eventually crack and either become resigned, forever being puppeteered by other people, or he will say no and take control over his own life. And since I want a satisfying ending for this specific character arc of his, we're picking option 2. I think that for Desmond, much of this process would be internal. From an outside view, there wouldn't be much difference, as we would have still followed a similar trajectory. But the reasoning behind Desmond's actions would have changed dramatically. He would no longer be just a passive spectator in his own life, and he would call out ideas he thinks are stupid, as well as present his own and in general stand his ground. Which is also why I would make him visit other places before the Grand Temple. It gives him the opportunity to lead and to make his own choices, and also prove to the others that he isn't just some idiot that they need to babysit. It's important for Desmond, as well as for the overall flow of the story, to show who he is as a person making his own choices regardless of outside pressure, as opposed to him being just a key to unlock Izu's secrets. Though that is a part of him he will have to reckon with as well, but we can keep that for the next game. As a side effect of this slow self-realization, Desmond would inevitably have to consider his place in the Brotherhood, as well as the Brotherhood as a whole. After all, he saw how the same Brotherhood functioned under two different mentors in two different eras, as well as what values it upheld, so it's only natural he would make comparisons. It would also bring forth the complicated topic of his father, and Desmond would have to reconcile his own memories and what the other members of the Brotherhood experienced under William Miles's leadership, however contradicting the memories and experiences may be. By the end, Desmond will understand his father more and perhaps even sympathize with him, but none of that newly found understanding should negate the hurt his father inflicted unto him. Abuse doesn't simply disappear just because we learn that the abuser was a deeply hurt person, and not every victim can forgive and forget, and that's okay. Emotions are complicated and can often contradict one another, especially when it comes to abuse from a family member. This was a roundabout way of me saying that I would not reconcile Desmond and his father. There is simply too much hurt there, and while I wouldn't completely dismiss the possibility of reconciliation, it would also require for William to change, and that is not something he's capable of at this point in time, meaning during Assassin's Creed 3. His own identity is too intertwined with his status as the mentor of the Brotherhood. Any criticism, be it of him as a father or as a mentor, threatens who he is, which he can't handle because of his own ego, which in turn hides how fragile he actually is. It's similar to how insecure men can't handle criticism because they view it as an attack on their person. So while Desmond and his father would be able to work together in a professional capacity, first out of necessity and later from mutual tolerance and understanding, there will always be a distance. I can't imagine William taking threats to his authority in stride, whether said threats are real or assumed. The threat in question would be Desmond, because yes, I would in fact make use of what Assassin's Creed 1 and 2 so kindly set up, and slap mentorship onto Desmond. Nothing much would happen during Assassin's Creed 3, of course, he's too busy figuring out who he is as a person, but it would be something he would end up thinking by the very end of the story. The Brotherhood has to change if it wants to survive, and wouldn't you look at it, there's this one guy who has 2 lifetimes of 2 great mentors worth of knowledge floating in his brain. How convenient. But since this is Desmond at the end of the journey, he actively chooses that as his future. It's not that there's no one else who can do it, it's that he wants to do it. It would also make hunting Juno easier, let's be real here, but I'm getting ahead of myself a bit. I would also get rid of the animals completely, because at this point in the story it makes no sense for it to still be a feature. The first 2 games could justify it, but in this one the danger is unquestionably in the present, and we are also on the clock, so it makes no sense to keep diving into the past like that, because it would just leave Desmond vulnerable. His and Connor's stories would therefore be a case of resonance. 2 parallel storylines that don't interact, but both independently reach a similar conclusion, and that makes them feel connected. In other words, they resonate with each other. This would also set a precedent for any future games. What's happening in the past storyline would always be a hint as to what is going to be happening in the present storyline. If my version of Assassin's Creed 3 sees Desmond finally finding his footing regarding the question of his own identity, then the finale has to change to accommodate that. I always disliked the finale of the original Assassin's Creed 3 because it simply didn't make sense for Desmond as a character. His inner conflict isn't about being willing or unwilling to sacrifice himself. It's about agency, about being forced to do what others deem right for him. But while the framing is stupid, the choice presented isn't. Which is the lesser evil? A natural disaster or a goddess hell-bent on enslaving humanity? Desmond's decision in the original of choosing to let Juno out to ensure the soul flare doesn't erase humanity from existence makes sense to the moment he dies, because then it just feels like he threw the responsibility of dealing with the fallout of that onto others. And then the following games proceeded to deal with the super dangerous, super ancient evil goddess off screen. Obviously we're not gonna do that. He still lets Juno out, but using the eye only fries the temple, not Desmond, so that he can deal with the consequences of his actions personally, which further reinforces the theme of taking responsibility of your own life we have going on with him. It also ties nicely into the idea of mentorship, as I said earlier, and it would set two goals for any future game. Take down Juno and revive, restore, transform the Brotherhood. Those goals are directly linked because who else would you enlist in your crusade against an ancient goddess than a group of people who have historically never cared about gods? Juno is simply another target, just a bit bigger and less corporeal than usual. With that, the story of Assassin's Creed 3 ends, and the stage is set for any future editions, which I may take a closer look at in this series, even if it means I will have to invent an entire new storyline for the future sections. But that's just how it is sometimes, isn't it? And that's about all I have time for in this video. This is hopefully going to be a series where I take a look at games I have beef with, or would simply do differently, but which don't warrant a 2-hour analysis. It is also, as the title suggests, going to be very subjective, which means you may disagree with my choices, and that is fine. Maybe you think the OG version is better. Great, let me know why. I'm a curious person and love learning how different people would write a similar story differently. Or even better, what game would you personally write differently? Let me know in the comments. Also, please like and subscribe. It's important for the algorithm. And don't forget to hit the little bell to get notified when I upload next, since my schedule is irregular. I'm on many social media, links are in the description box below, and if you're feeling extra generous, you can tip me on coffee. And until next time, safe journeys!